Welcome back. Let's Get Physical Therapy is an educational podcast brought to you by MedStar Health and hosted by me, physical therapist Becca Schumer. I will be sharing the mic with tons of healthcare professionals with the goal of educating and inspiring fellow PTs and future PTs. We hope you find this both informative and inspirational, ultimately optimizing how we treat our patients and grow as professionals. Please enjoy today's episode. With the physical therapy boards right around the corner in late April, we wanted to offer a little bit of motivation and inspiration from a newer graduate, Haana Nelson. She received her bachelor's in exercise science and her doctoral degree in physical therapy at St. Louis University, Go Billikens. Haana moved to Baltimore to start her first job as a PT at MedStar Health, PT at Dundalk, Maryland in August of 2022. Haana has a full-time position with split hours between ortho and neuro populations, which she's going to dive into a little more starting now. Haana, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Excited to be here.
We're really excited to have you. This is a little twist on what we've been doing. We've been highlighting different, say, like surgeries like ACLs. We talked about baseball medicine, and I thought you had a really cool story, and I wanted to share that with the podcast world.
Oh, well, thank you.
How did you get into PT? Why did you want to be a physical therapist?
Sure. I feel like in physical therapy school, there's like one of a few categories you fall into, like a loved one, an injured patient. I was in the injured patient category. You know, I did the whole water sports thing, so I was very uncoordinated on land. But I was a swimmer and I did water polo and I got the classic knee tendonitis situation. So I had physical therapy and I loved that you could be like an outgoing person, very talkative. But the one thing I always came back to, is now with the clinical lens, you see it from a different perspective. But at the time, I was just so amazed that he could listen to my story, did not need an x-ray, didn't need the MRI or whatever I had done, but was like, all right, you had this, you feel like this, you benefit from this. All right, this is what we do next. So I always related it to like a puzzle piece that needed to be solved. And that's why I was excited about like the complexity. And I know in PT now, as PT students, you're always like, it depends, it's so frustrating. But, that's one of the things that got me into PT is the puzzle piece and the complex nature of learning from a patient's story and helping them to provide them with the tools that they need to ultimately, heal themselves. We're just that mentor piece. So I had a really positive example in the clinic, and so I was excited to get started. So I did the whole 6-year program thing at St. Louis University and the direct admission situation there, and now I'm here.
You graduated 6 months ago, is that right?
Yes, May of 2022 in good old St. Louis, Missouri. And I graduated, in 6 years because we had that like sort of bridge senior year and those summer school classes in there. But yeah, we made it to May.
We hopefully will have a lot of PT students listening in on this. I'm curious, What went into you looking for your first job out of school?
Sure. Definitely an interesting story because I've always lived in the Midwest, born and raised Chicago suburbs, went to school in St. Louis, and I was at the point where I wanted a new place to grow professionally and personally. And I knew the best outlet for me would be to go somewhere different. And I knew it was going to be a challenge because it's a first career and, they always say the first few years are tricky. And I knew that, and I was going to add a little bit more of a challenge onto it, I guess, too. So a friend of mine and I wanted to move somewhere different. We had a few cities in mind. And so then the search really began of starting over. When you go to school, you learn about clinical sites from your peers and from your own experiences, and the systems in that area. But when you go somewhere completely different, you have to do a lot of investigating to like find a good fit for you. So, first I had to narrow it down on the city, Baltimore, and then I had to, investigate a little bit more as to like the medical systems and where I could find the best company fit. And long story short, I'm on this podcast, so I made it to MedStar.
And we're so happy to have you. Did a lot of your classmates kind of go where they had a rotation? How'd that look for your classmates in PT school?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think a lot of them, it was very easy, if you found a perfect fit in clinical, hard to turn down like that sort of job interview of 8 weeks and they love you, you love this. It was sort of like a simultaneous transfer. So a lot, I'd say, little less than 50% kind of went that route, either with the same company, different location, or same place. And I think, there's pros and cons to doing that, ending up in the same place as your clinical instructor, in the same place as your clinical site. There's a lot of good things, but I also would like to speak to the people who are ready for the challenge of trying something new. Like, it is possible, and if you are interested in a company and a company fires you up as much as this did to me, then it's okay if you're learning a brand new EMR, or if you're learning a brand new patient population or a split position. I think there's no real mistakes in your first job, because you learn what works for you. And so if the first fit, you adjust and you find what works. But I think a lot of people, to answer your question in a long way, ended up in a lot of their clinical rotations.
As a new grad, or even not as a new grad, but just a physical therapist looking for a new job for a different company, there's so many factors that could go into that, like location, the group, the dynamics that are there, the money, con ed money. What kind of things went into you and why you chose to work for MedStar Health?
Sure. I think the biggest thing was my program at St. Louis University really touched on something called cura personalis. And I think I'm butchering how you say it, but it relates a little bit to the Ignatian philosophy of caring for the whole person. And that's how I learned how to be a physical therapist. So I was trying to find a fit that helped inspire me along that same mission or mission statement. We talked a lot about mission and values in PT school, and not knowing the area of Baltimore or Maryland or the greater DMV, I had to rely on looking at mission statements and spirit values when investigating the company. So the whole it's how we treat people slogan was oh, okay, I get that. I've done that. I feel that. Okay, this might be it. All right, let's do some more research. So the compassion piece is what drew me in, and then the logistical questions you're asking are also a big consideration. You have to do your research and get into the interview process to see what the compensation is, but not just that. The whole package of also how much continuing education is offered to maintain your licensure, how much you have access to that, how much funds do you have, or how supported are you to get certifications, is one thing that drew me to MedStar, is because they have the environment of learning and all those continuing courses, and I love to learn. So that was inspiring and helpful to me, that I could do that as I go along. I don't have to worry about my continuing ed credits for licensure, because there's always an opportunity for me to keep learning and to set those courses that I'm struggling with. So that was really helpful for me. And beyond just the environment of learning, there's also the ability to try and pursue courses that end in certifications. And so since I'm interested in neuro, maybe down the line I'll get into some different certifications, and it's good to know that a company supports those types of goals.
Definitely. And I think you brought up the neuro aspect, and I want to kind of get into that, because as a new grad, that's a difficult population to just dive in with from the get-go. So
Sure.
how has that been for you?
Sure. I was lucky enough to have some experience in clinicals, where I was at a day institute and had some some inpatient experience. but none of them were exactly like the setting I'm in now, right? So even though I had some experience, you're a new grad, you're on your own, you don't have that person looking over you like this documentation needs to be like this, or you should think about this test, or what's the sequence here. So that was an adjustment. I was lucky to have a neuro team at my site. So I'm in Dundalk, and we have a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, and another physical therapist, in addition to a PTA. So we've got a neuro team, and that really helps in terms of, like, you're speaking to what you look for when you're applying for jobs. I think this sort of connects back to it. Like, when you're jumping into a position that's a little bit different, having that experienced team was helpful, to bounce questions off of, to have a good balance of, like, learning to trust your clinical experience and also bounce things off, confirm in your first few months. And then, things get taken away, the training wheels come off, and you start to find your groove. But it is a complex population to work with because of the continuum of care too, like the amount of resources these patients need, from inpatient to outpatient to after discharge. Like, there's a lot of talk about, like, continuing fitness in the neuro population after discharge from outpatient PT. And I think that's an ongoing conversation that I'm trying to still collect resources for my patients so that they have the best access to continue their care after it's no longer skilled PT, but just maintenance. So luckily, just having the system, the MedStar system in place, creates a lot of experienced clinicians and resources to rely on to collect. It just takes time, but it'll slowly grow to be comfortable. And so that is very helpful. They bring me so much joy. It's always been a patient population that I have just adored because of the instant sort of ability to see progress when you come up with, like, one little tip of how this can change in their daily life, or this is the way you're walking, and they're like, oh, light bulb, done. And it's not always like that, of course, but it's a very, very fun and complex patient population to work with. So I'm thankful to have the people around me.
I could take this a couple of different directions, but I think it's important to talk about mentorship as a new grad. And if you jump into a clinic, you don't have some guidance, and you kind of get stuck in your ways, and you only know what you know. So if you're not being challenged, then it's hard to get off that track. I think it's good to highlight kind of the importance of having a team around you and having people to bounce ideas off of, right?
Sure. I think, speaking on that, I feel lucky to have learned a little bit about, like, how much, like, our own biases and how we treat can impact, and positively and negatively, but a lot of times negatively, impact, like, the individuality of our treatment and the way we customize treatment. And it is really lucky that we have another neurophysical therapist here too, because she was away on maternity leave and she's come back, and it's been helpful to have, like, a second set of eyes on some of the patients I've been seeing for that reason. Like, doesn't make anyone a bad clinician, for getting another brain. And that's also why I was excited to move to a different area. You meet people who have gone to different schools, who have had different professors, who have had different mentorship, and they have different styles. And, the different styles can help the patient. And so being willing to go outside of your comfort zone and try something, or to receive, I think that's the biggest thing, is to be able to receive that advice. Once you get into your automatic biases or zone, and you're like, you have blinders on sometimes. So it can be so helpful to have, like, that PTA or the PT check in and be like, well, what about this? I'm like, all right, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it. And then, oh, that's another tool in my toolbox for next time. So I think that's extremely helpful, and it's been rather the unofficial mentorship so far. But I am enrolled in MedStar's neuro program, woohoo, coming up soon. So going to be matched with someone in more of a structured way. So that'll also be a great opportunity to learn from their skill set, their education, their professors, their CIs, and absorb the knowledge in that way.
In working with the neuro population, it's obviously a very challenging population, and there's so many different team members involved, as you were alluding to earlier. As a new grad, how do you get that confidence to speak up and be part of that team and really advocate for your patients?
Oh, good question. We have team meetings here every month, and I remember the first month just sitting, just absorbing. I didn't know these patients very well. I was jumping in. I was like, okay, how does this go? And then as you go along, you're like, okay, for the benefit of my patient, even if it makes me uncomfortable, we need to talk about X person. This is what I'm seeing. What do you guys think? And I think it's hard. It's really hard to jump from student to professional, especially when you're reaching out to people outside of the office. I found it easier to start advocating for patients in the clinic, and but then the harder part became the phone calls to the other healthcare providers, as a very necessary part of my job and very rewarding part, but scary. Very scary to pick up the phone and call other people, and then you realize, you have a good conversation with the physician, and you're like, okay, like we are on the same team. Just because I'm 5 months from graduation doesn't make me any different. We're all advocating for the same goals. And I think the more and more we have that mindset of challenging ourselves to do that for our patients, the better the patient's care is. And like you speaking to the complexity of these patients, they need a lot of resources. They need not just their general practitioner, but their neurologists. And then sometimes the management for spasticity, and reaching out and setting up those referrals or giving recommendations can all be a very useful part of a clinician's job.
Is there anything you wish you had learned more about in PT school?
Oh, and I think when you leave PT school, you're like, oh, I've learned it all. I have the whole book. I mean, I think there's so many things, and that's why I like the environment of learning, is because I'm like, well, I want to learn about this. I want to learn about that. And I think that's also why I was drawn to neuro, is I was like, I want to learn from speech, and I want to learn from OT about how to communicate better with these patients with aphasia, or how to manage the upper extremity coordination. I don't know that I never learned the fine motor stuff. So that's why I like working on a team like that. Specifically, I feel like PT school has done such a great job of the foundation, right? And then in clinic, I was lucky to work at that day center as my last clinical, and I had a little bit of that phone call experience, this much of like coordinating with the doctors. And I don't know if there's a way to teach that. It's more of like a trial by fire experience working with different healthcare providers, because we had the interprofessional education. They did a great job with all the book stuff, but it's all time and practice and all the stuff you've heard before. That's the one thing that comes to mind. And, I think PT school does a great job of the foundation. I think it's got to be the commitment to continue to learn, to challenge the bias, right, that you develop when you start to just go on automatic, and challenge what you learned at clinicals, and the sort of mindset that I have to keep learning for the benefit of my patients from other professionals and from the resources available. But yeah, I think I feel like I could go on, but I don't want to be a detriment to my education, because I love my education. I just want 10 more years and no tests, right?
That's one of the amazing parts about being a physical therapist, and we all have different journeys and we're all led different ways. Like for you, you're jumping right into neuro, versus for another clinician, they might go more of a general route or a sports route, or who knows, any which way.
No, yeah, that's very true. And I think I'm lucky that I was really into neuro too in my last two clinicals, and I was really lucky to have found a split position because mine is ortho and neuro. Because I felt in my last two clinicals that's all I did was neuro and just very basic exam measures, right? I was like, oh, I don't know any special tests anymore. Please help me. And I remember during my interview with our clinic manager, Kyle, we were talking through cases, like not as a test, but as like where are you at with your knowledge? And he gave me like a classic frozen shoulder, and it took me like a minute to get there. And I was like, but this is why I want to split. Like, this is why I want an ortho neuro job because I need to keep my basics and I need to have a little complexity. I need both. So I was lucky to kind of take off my blinders for a little bit and be like, I don't just need neuro. I need it all. Well, it all, everything like that. But that was really a helpful example.
I'm glad that you're open to that because again, sometimes it's people do want to like graduate and jump
Good.
into a specialty area and they
Yeah.
haven't become just good clinicians, just
Yeah.
foundationally good clinicians. Going back to being a new grad, looking for your
Mhm.
first job, what are a few things that some tips you can give for new grads looking for a new job and getting into the field of physical therapy?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I remember talking about this and there's no class for that either, right? For the job hunt. I know we have like a little bit of a seminar at our school, like a Zoom meeting where they're like, oh, here's some interview tips. And we're like, okay, let's go. I think the hardest part is starting. The hardest part is starting to look and not being intimidated by the fact you have to find the perfect job. I think it is taking off those blinders and being like, even though I'm interested in this one setting or this one specialty, what is there out there in the area I'm looking at, or what areas are out there? Kind of taking off your blinders for a moment and giving yourself like the chance to dream of a new location or a new setting, or what can PT look like for you. So I think that's one. And then starting, like I just looked on the major search engines like the Indeed or the whatever, just to see what was out there. And then you do like your deep dive. Like it's multi-step process. You can do your superficial look over and then you do your deep dive into the companies. I was looking at like the mission statement and the values to help guide, like see if the team fit or the team culture would be compatible. Then you put yourself out there and that allows you to find out and meet the team, right? Like to find out like what is the culture from paper to person. And I was very lucky to have meet everyone when I came for my team visit and everything like that. Um, and you have that list of those questions about, okay, what is the mentorship here? What is my continuing education? What is the support for learning more and getting certifications? What sort of experience do we have that I can lean on here? Like, what do my hours look like? X, Y, and Z, trying to find your balance. And whether that is in a position similar to your clinicals or not, allowing yourself to have those blinders off and figure out what your best fit could be.
Visit the clinic that you're
Oh,
interested in, right? Because you want to learn those team dynamics and kind of see like, do you see yourself fitting into that, or is it too extreme from your personality and things might clash?
yes. I was based in St. Louis at the time, and it was very tempting. They all offered virtual visits if you wanted, or in person, up to you. And I was very glad that I could cluster some interviews and come in for a weekend because it does make such a difference how your visit goes. You can kind of see like I was here and I was welcome to the people and everyone introduced themselves. Very different from other visits where you're the clinic equipment, right? I liked the team dynamic here and the emphasis on the team, and the emphasis on like just trying to get to know each other to see what we can bounce off ideas of. So that was very helpful. You said you had another thing. You had a few things came to mind when I was
Yes,
talking
thank you.
before.
Look at you. Who's interviewing who here?
Ah, okay, okay, I'll
Yeah,
stop.
but
You
I
keep.
was I'm just kidding. Yeah, I feel like I did this in school, and that's why this idea is coming to my brain. But prioritizing a list, or make a list and prioritizing what is important to you. Is it location? Is it financial? Is it the mentorship piece? Like, what is important to you, and what are deal breakers, basically?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's definitely it's definitely a good strategy. I feel like I had to play like a balancing game, right? I love balance in my life. So there wasn't like for me one thing that had to win out. I had to have a little bit of everything, a little bit of the team, a little bit of the mentoring. But yes, that can be super helpful strategy. I know it works very differently for everyone in terms of the job search. But I think the biggest thing is starting to look at your options. And then, like you said, going from there, the decision part can be sometimes difficult of what is my priority in finding my first job in my environment. Where do I want to grow and where do I see myself going in the next few years? And what place offers me that opportunity to grow? So yeah, very good points.
What is the recognition jar?
Oh, wait, yes. Okay, so we've gone through like a few different iterations of it at Dundalk. We had like envelopes at one point. Now it's a jar. But it's something where we like write down what like another staff member has done in our clinic where like we really just like saw a little moment of joy, whether if it's for a patient or someone else, like helping making sure the clinic schedules stay balanced. So we have a jar, and then we'll read them or get them back at staff meetings. So that's helpful and positive. And we just started on one of our mirrors in the clinic office, like a quote of the week from patients, just like silly things they'll say. Nothing's up there yet. We still need ideas, but I had a patient who was doing tandem balance exercise and just said, I'm flying. And I was like, that's hilarious. Like, we need little spots of joy throughout our days and to celebrate like just the silliness of life um, to keep us, going and keep the morale high. So I think that goes to a little bit of like the team dynamic here that I was looking for initially. So yeah.
It's been a really great conversation. I hope some new grads take some gems away from it and maybe helped to guide them for their first job when looking. It's a hard process, but you'll get
Yes.
through it, right? Any
Yeah.
last any
Doable.
last words any last words of encouragement for anyone
Oh,
listening today to get into their
no.
first job?
Um, Except this time last year, I was studying for boards or starting that process. So if they're in that boat too, thinking about April boards, and doing clinics, like I am thinking of you and knowing that you can go through it and then start the job process or July or whatever you're looking at, knowing that it's doable and the graduation celebration is in sight and you just check one thing off the list at a time. And like you said, I really hope there were a few nuggets you can take away. But best of luck to everyone out there.
I like to ask our guests their favorite quote. Doesn't have to be physical therapy related, but what's a favorite quote that moves you, drives you, motivates you, etc.
Oh
in
my
in
god.
life? In life.
In life. Okay, okay. I'm trying to think. There's like a few. The one that I have memorized, I it came to me more in high school, but it stuck with me, and it's more about like growth. So it's from The Lion King. It's like the past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. So I think it just talks about more like the growth mindset of taking a mistake in your life that seems hurtful at the time, but just making sure that we're looking at it from a positive lens of growth and moving forward the best we can.
Love it. Got great energy. I see big things in your future.
Well,
So we're
thank you.
we're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Where can people find you? Where you treat? I know you said Dundalk, right?
Yes, I am at MedStar outpatient and Dundalk. Yeah. Do you want email?
That's totally up to you, Hannah.
You can find me. My email is my name, Haana, HAANA .R.Nelson, NELSON, at medstar.net. More than happy to answer any questions. But otherwise, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for listening to the Let's Get Physical Therapy podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram at MedStar Health PT. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so we can reach more listeners just like you. As always, we appreciate your time and hope you join us for our next episode.